Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're looking at part 4 of the Science Uprising series. This one is about the fine-tuning argument. The title is Fine-Tuning, You Don't Suck. Now the fine-tuning argument usually deals with the fundamental constants of the universe and how if they had been different, stars wouldn't have been able to form or wouldn't have been able to produce carbon, and life as we know it needs carbon to evolve. The fine-tuning argument assumes an old universe and evolution, so I wonder if you're going to address this fundamental disagreement with your young Earth creationism viewpoint. My guess is that you're going to leave it vague enough to not obviously require old ages and evolution, and make the argument say God, and then hope that your audience draws the same conclusion that you do, that the Earth is young and that creationism is correct. Let's take a look.
If you were designing a universe for life, I suspect you might design it differently. There is no evidence of design or purpose to our universe.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, when 99.99% of all the area in the universe will kill you almost instantly and a good chunk of the rest will still kill you, just not as quickly, that doesn't scream perfect design for life. But I've never really been a fan of dismissing this particular argument just by pointing out that the majority of the universe will kill you. The cosmos is a beautiful place, so I can absolutely accept the idea that a god would have designed it to be vast and beautiful. It's not like he actually did place us in the universe at random, he put us on one of the few places where we could actually live. So while it is not a very efficient design if you think humanity is God's ultimate achievement, that does not mean that it wasn't designed with something else in mind, such as beauty. I mean, I'm sure God could have made something that is far more efficient and still beautiful, being all-powerful and all that, but this point does not completely demolish the fine-tuning argument.
I'm a speck, on a speck, orbiting a speck, among still other specks, in the middle of specklessness!
I really do like Bill Nye, but I think Carl Sagan did that one better.
Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam.
I cut that down a bit for time, but I really do recommend going and listening to that whole speech. It's really quite good. You know, I think the thing in these videos that jars my suspension of disbelief the most is the idea that the video someone is watching could just randomly switch, and that creationist content would be so fascinating as to keep them glued to their screen without changing the channel or trying to troubleshoot their device or get the original video back in any way or just flat turning it off.
No design, no purpose.
Are we really just insignificant specks?
That depends entirely on your perspective. That's the whole point of Sagan's pale blue dot speech. When you look at the vastness of the cosmos, then even if we somehow become an interstellar species in the same vein as Star Trek, we have zero chance of having a significant impact on the universe as a whole. So from the cosmic perspective, even a best-case scenario for our species has us being an ultimately meaningless blip in the great span of time. But on a human level, of course we're significant to each other. Being able to change your perspective from time to time is helpful when determining how important your actions are. In Sagan's speech, he talks about conquerors, generals, and emperors. Is it important to rule the world? Well, that depends entirely on what you're going to do with it. Ultimately, whatever you do won't have any permanent effects, as the Earth won't be around in 5 billion years when our sun explodes and engulfs it. So why bother with killing and conquering? What will come of it in the end? Nothing. So why not try to make the world a better place and do what you can to make people happy and healthy now, because while the difference might not be permanent, it does matter to us now.
in an accidental universe? Do we really just suck?
You know, it's really suspicious that you cut Bill Nye's video to say just suck instead of we just suck like you are heavily implying he said. So looking at it in context, yeah, he's just continuing on with that spec thing, making a point about his realization that he is insignificant when compared to the universe as a whole. Now, in context, he is talking about an experience he had in the 3rd grade, hence the infantile language of I just suck, rather than Carl Sagan's more eloquent delivery of the same idea.
Those are some dramatic claims, but not everyone thinks that way.
No, not everybody does. In fact, I would be willing to bet that most people don't. So this appears to be yet another case of you guys building up a straw man instead of addressing any actual points.
In fact, some very distinguished scientists disagree.
Okay, looks like we're talking to Freeman Dyson for this one. And before I look into his connections, which I assume at this point are going to be to the Discovery Institute, I can see that the first thing listed under awards there is the Templeton Prize, which, if you don't know, is a nice little prize where they decide on their conclusion in advance that life has a spiritual dimension, and then give out the prize to researchers whose work appears to support this pre-drawn conclusion. And now that I've Googled him myself, which sounds dirtier than I intended, I find that he is not actually affiliated with the Discovery Institute. In fact, he's actually a pretty great scientist. But he does seem to be a bit of a dabbler. Despite being a theoretical physicist and mathematician, he does not hesitate to give his opinion on biology. And what is his opinion on biology? Well, he holds to the dual origin theory of abiogenesis, which is the idea that life first develops cells, then enzymes, and then much later, genes. For evolution, he seems to accept it, even if he does hold some contrarian viewpoints. In an interview with the outlet 52 Insights, he agreed with the idea that Darwinian natural selection works perfectly well on large populations, but is of the opinion that for small populations, random genetic drift is more important than selection factors. And since speciation happens when a population becomes separated, it's more likely to happen with small populations, therefore genetic drift should be considered the primary driving force of evolution rather than natural selection. So here we have a religious scientist who accepts the theory of evolution and old ages for the universe. I wonder what he's going to say for you guys.
Freeman Dyson, a world-renowned physicist and mathematician, says, and I quote, "The more I examine the universe and study the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense must have known that we were coming."
Ah, I see. You didn't actually interview him, you're just quoting him. Yes, he is religious. Most religious people would agree with that statement in one way or another. That's not surprising, and this man's opinion on the matter does not make it true or false.
So maybe it's not an accident that Earth is habitable.
Yeah, of the trillions of planets in the universe, the fact that life started on one that is capable of supporting life really isn't all that impressive. Would we expect life to form on a planet that couldn't support life? Now that would be a miraculous bit of evidence for a god.
We caught up with physicist Bijan Namadi, who was a senior engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab for over 16 years.
What we've discovered in the last few decades is that the properties of the universe in general, and our planet in particular, are fine-tuned, not just for our survival, but actually for our thriving, our benefit.
Okay, so you actually got a real PhD scientist with no apparent ties to the Discovery Institute for once. Well done. And it is his opinion that Earth was designed for us. Great. We now have two guys' opinions. And I can get clips of scientists saying basically the opposite. In fact, you already did that for me earlier in your own video. This doesn't matter. Get on to the evidence.
So, Earth is not just habitable. It's better than that. It's hospitable.
Sure. Let's pretend that the planet where 75% of the surface will kill you and another huge chunk of the remaining surface will be incredibly hard for humans to live on is completely hospitable to humans. Let's see where this gets us.
It's like this. Imagine you're a space explorer and you land on a distant planet. There's no water, no oxygen, and it's 300 degrees below zero. You're screwed.
Okay, so we can imagine an astronaut landing on an inhospitable planet. This proves nothing. Imagine you're an astronaut and you land on a planet with the same nitrogen-oxygen mixture that we have here with drinkable water. Woo, my imaginary scenario came last, so I win.
But then off in the distance you see a structure, and the closer you get, the more it looks like a house. When you open the door, you find it's been filled with warm, breathable air. You take off your spacesuit and find a faucet with drinkable water, and a refrigerator stocked with healthy and delicious food.
Okay, I get it. You're analogizing the house to Earth and the inhospitable planet to the rest of the universe. Problem is, we don't really know how many hospitable planets there are in the universe, so this still means nothing until we have more data. Using the data that we do have, there are an estimated 40 billion rocky Earth-sized planets in their stars' habitable zones in just the Milky Way galaxy alone. With an estimated 100 billion galaxies in the universe, that is a lot of potentially habitable planets. So the fact that life developed on one of those habitable ones is not a surprise at all.
What's your first thought? The house and everything in it was the product of a mindless natural process? Or that it was designed to take care of you, to meet your needs, and that someone prepared it as a home for human beings, like you?
Yeah, but your analogy doesn't really work. See, you start off in the house, you don't find it on a planet. And you can see from your house that there are a lot of other houses on the planet that look like they might be habitable as well. And the house looks more like a naturally formed structure, like a cave rather than a house. And there are more problems with your analogy, but ultimately it doesn't matter because analogies are not evidence. They're supposed to help you understand a concept. Just because a loose analogy of some kind can be drawn does not mean that whatever you're analogizing is true.
Our planet, Earth, is that home.
Our planet is a terrestrial planet. It has water and carbon, both necessary for life. It has an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere in just the right proportion for life to thrive.
Man, I really thought you were going to actually get into something good with this series. Of course the place where life developed has all the stuff that is essential for the life that developed there. That is not surprising, and this should not be a surprise to anyone who has given it more than a moment's thought. Yet here you are, presenting it as if it's some profound truth that will shatter whatever worldview you're arguing against.
We have plate tectonics to circulate minerals. We have a magnetosphere that protects us from harmful radiation. Our moon stabilizes our axial tilt, giving us a stable climate. And we have gas giant planets, particularly Jupiter, cleaning up the solar system from comets and asteroids that could harm us. And we are located in the habitable zone of a very stable, energetic star, which itself is located in the habitable zone of a metal-rich, mature galaxy. So the Earth is apparently exceedingly rare.
Wait, at what point there did you demonstrate that these traits are actually rare? What data are you using? I searched through your stuff and it seems like your most recent publications are in papers discussing NASA missions to find potentially habitable exoplanets. So is this another case of a scientist who does good work when publishing without affiliation to a creationist institution, but then flips the script when being interviewed by one? Also, I would be very surprised to find out that Bijan Namadi is actually a young Earth creationist given what I've seen of his work, and the fact that he doesn't actually seem to be affiliated with any creationist institutions. My guess here is that he's simply another religious scientist who thinks that God made us special and doesn't see anything wrong with using science to figure out how God did everything. I wonder if the Discovery Institute people had to be dishonest with him in order to get this interview. That is a common creationist tactic, and it wouldn't surprise me here at all.
There is no design or purpose to our universe.
Still stuck on that? Even though the Earth meets exactly the conditions needed to sustain life?
Yes, because you would not expect to find life being sustained somewhere where life could not be sustained. I can't believe you find this convincing.
Well, what about our universe and the precise settings of its physical laws that keep things in order? What they call fine-tuning. Cosmological physicist Frank Tipler explains.
Fine-tuning in physics refers to the observed fact, that were we to modify the constants of nature just slightly, life would never appear in this universe.
Yep, that's a fact. We don't know why these fundamental constants ended up like they did. It could be that our local universe is part of a larger cosmos, and in other locations within the cosmos, different constants exist. It could be some other form of the multiverse. It could be that the constants couldn't be any other way. It could be that we just got lucky. It could be that God set them. To assert any of these hypotheses about why the constants are what they are as fact would be pure speculation. I tend to prefer siding with the people who are honest about not knowing, rather than the ones who insist that they do know the answer for sure. Oh yeah, and I'd also like to point out that Dr. Tipler here appears to accept the Big Bang and evolution. Well, I'm assuming he accepts evolution. I'm not seeing anything where he talks about it directly, but the way he discusses cosmology leads me to believe that he has no problem with evolution. Oh yeah, and his views on cosmology are largely dismissed by other cosmologists. There are several examples of people criticizing his conclusions, but I like Lawrence Krauss's the best. Tipler's book is the most extreme example of uncritical and unsubstantiated arguments put into print by an intelligent professional scientist.
Imagine you have a universe app
Another goddamn analogy? Fine, what is it this time?
where you can mess with the universal laws of physics from the beginning of time. Starting with gravity. Too strong and the stars would be unstable and deadly to life. Too weak and the stars would struggle to create carbon and oxygen. Again, no life. We got Stephen Meyer, who holds a PhD from Cambridge, to break it down.
Nice. You got the mathematical physicist to lay out the basics, but you don't agree with the conclusions that he draws from them, so you find someone on your payroll who does agree with you instead. So when you interview the mathematical physicist, you stick to the most basic of basics. But when you want to go more in-depth into the math and the physics of the matter, you transition over to the philosopher instead. Because Tipler draws conclusions from his work that you don't like. Most cosmologists don't like it either, which is actually probably why he was willing to talk to you in the first place.
The force of gravity is not too strong, not too weak. The speed of light, not too fast, not too slow. The ratios of these fundamental forces are delicately balanced. It's the just right universe that makes life possible.
How is that any different than what Tipler said? I feel like you guys are just stretching for runtime in this one, which is weird because this is the longest one so far, and it's not like you set a precedent that all these videos have to be around 8.5 minutes long.
So it's gotta be exact. But materialists say we just got lucky with gravity. Now, let's set our universe app to random.
Is random a valid option for the beginning of the universe? Could the gravitational constant have been different? Is there a range that it would have been restricted to? Was it set at the Big Bang, and were there any failed Big Bangs that failed because the constant was wrong? The very real answer to all of these questions at the moment is that we do not know. So to assert that the universe is designed because the gravitational constant might have been different is to make a massive unwarranted assumption.
And tap the button. What are the chances that the app will luck onto a gravity setting that just happens to allow life to emerge?
Almost zero. But still greater than zero, which means it is possible, and that's assuming it was actually random.
Scientists have crunched the numbers, and the answer? Not good.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say 1 out of 1,000,000.
Actually, for gravity, it's worse. Worse than 1 chance in 1,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000,000.
So going back to my card shuffling analogy from part 3, it's about twice as likely as whatever order the cards are in after you shuffle a deck of cards. When you shuffle a deck of cards, the resulting order of the cards had a probability of occurring of 1 chance in 100 billion times 1,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000. When looking at it after the fact, odds don't matter.
Never tell me the odds.
Unlikely things happen all the time. Oh yeah, and I looked up the paper you seem to be referencing. In the abstract, the author makes it quite clear that he is looking at the set of parameters which would allow intelligent life to evolve. So even if I grant every point you have made in this video so far, at best it gets you to a deistic god who created the universe and laws of nature and then stepped back to let nature take its course.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Yeah! Yeah!
We all love rooting for long shots, but here's the thing. It's not just gravity. There are many other physical laws that also have to be just so for life to emerge in the universe.
For life to emerge? You're getting awfully close to using evolutionary terminology there. And yes, there are multiple constants, and there is some debate as to whether these constants are actually constant. They might be subject to change over time. In fact, we know some of them actually do change over time. The gravitational constant appears to have an oscillation period of just under 6 years. The fine structure constant appears to change depending on which direction you measure it from, though there is a good chance that the directional change is due to measurement error. Even in the article whose title proclaims that the fundamental constants never change, it states that the fine structure constant would have been stronger during the Big Bang. So these constants are not just fixed numbers that stay the same forever and ever, and they aren't understood well enough to make statements about why they are what they are with any amount of certainty.
And some of them are even more fine-tuned, even more unlikely than gravity. Without fine-tuning, our universe would be a horror story even Stephen King couldn't imagine.
Really? Because if the gravitational one was different, it might just be a spread out plane of mostly hydrogen. That's not a horror story, that's just boring. But yeah, gotta get that sensationalism in somewhere.
The very construction of the world and the fact that we seem to be the only blue-populated planet in the universe, it makes you have to believe that if we happened by accident, it would make winning the lottery look like flipping a coin. So I have a tendency to believe in intelligent design.
Stephen King has spoken. Tell all the astronomers and astrophysicists to pack it up and go home. This horror author has figured it all out.
Nobel Prize-winning physicist Charles Townes seemed to agree by stating, and I quote, "Intelligent design, as one sees it from a scientific point of view, seems to be quite real. This is a very special universe. It's remarkable that it came out just this way."
Yep, you sure did find another scientist who believes in God. I can find a bunch who don't. There's about a 50-50 split between scientists who believe in God and those who do not, at least in the US. I imagine the rest of the world there's more who don't believe than who do. I did find a survey that spanned 8 countries where if you average the percentage of scientists who identified as religious, it comes out to 42%, so that supports my idea, but I'm not sure this survey is entirely representative. If you look at the numbers of researchers per capita, the top 8 countries with the most researchers aren't even on the list. Some of those countries have a very high percentage of religious populations, like Finland, but others have a very low percentage, like Japan. I would be interested in a truly worldwide survey of religion among scientists, but ultimately it doesn't really matter much. Scientists are divided on the subject of religion. There is no scientific consensus, and finding a scientist who is of the opinion that the universe appears designed is just about as easy as finding one who is of the opinion that it does not appear designed.
But of course, materialist scientists claim they have a better answer.
There's an obvious and easy naturalistic explanation in the form of the cosmological multiverse.
Yep, that's a possibility. Nope, there is no evidence for it at this time. Just like there is no evidence that the constants were tweaked by a god. Oh yeah, and I also need to mention that simulations have been run with different values for the universal constants, and it has been found that there are other values for these constants that would still allow for star formation and the production of elements necessary for life as we know it, and thus life. So the universe isn't actually as fine-tuned as has been previously thought. And also keep in mind that this whole argument about fine-tuning the fundamental constants is all based around star formation, and these stars producing carbon, which is then flung out into the universe when they go supernova. So if you want to believe that God made all the stars about 6,000 years ago, it doesn't matter much because God put all the carbon that we need on Earth, right? So this whole argument assumes a billions of years old universe.
The multiverse acknowledges that the conditions necessary to make life in this universe are incredibly improbable, but it posits the existence of multiple billions of other universes, and we just happen to be in that lucky universe.
No, it's not that we happen to be in that lucky universe. It's that life would only ever arise in a universe that has the conditions that would allow for life. So the fact that life did arise in a universe where conditions allow for life is completely and utterly unsurprising.
Keep in mind that there's no evidence that these other universes actually exist.
Agreed. The multiverse does not give us any predictions and so cannot be tested. The multiverse is, however, the theoretical consequence of our current understanding of the laws of physics. I'm not sure what you picture when you hear the word multiverse, but it's not some setup like the TV show Sliders, where there are different versions of everyone who have made different choices throughout their lives than us. And for those of you who missed the 90s, Sliders was a show where George Cooper Jr. and Professor Gimli traveled in between parallel Earths trying to set right what once went wrong and hoping that each leap would be the leap home. Wait, no, that's not quite it. I'm mixing my references here. They were trapped slipping between parallel dimensions trying to find their home Earth. But if the multiverse is real, it's probably not like that. It's more like just before the Big Bang there was a period of cosmic inflation. At the moment of the Big Bang, cosmic inflation stopped for our universe but continued in the cosmos. In different universes, the cosmic inflation stopped at different times, giving those universes different laws of physics. These universes will never intersect with each other as they are physically separated in the ever-inflating cosmos. It is a lot to wrap your head around, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have more than the most rudimentary grasp of the concept, but it is plausible and would completely explain why we find ourselves in a universe that is capable of supporting life.
There are no experimentally tested laws of physics telling us that these other universes exist.
Ethan Siegel, a theoretical astrophysicist who studies the Big Bang Theory, seems to disagree. According to his article on what is and is not scientific about the multiverse is the theoretical result of well-established and widely accepted aspects of theoretical physics, the quantum nature of everything and the properties of cosmic inflation. Now maybe he's wrong and I'm not educated enough in cosmology to figure out where, but my point here is that this is not settled science by any stretch of the imagination. On the one hand, we have people like Ethan Siegel, who seem convinced of the multiverse but still use cautionary language. He says that the multiverse is a consequence of the laws of physics as they are best understood today, leaving room for future understanding to overturn the multiverse hypothesis. And on the other hand, we have people like you saying that our only current model that accounts for the laws of physics being what they are isn't testable, therefore it must be wrong and God is the answer for sure. Never mind that the God hypothesis is also untestable and also not even suggested by our understanding of the laws of physics like the multiverse is.
No evidence for leprechauns, no evidence for unicorns, no evidence for the existence of other universes with different values of these fundamental constants.
And no evidence for God. If you're lumping leprechauns and unicorns into this discussion, then remember that God is much closer to the leprechaun and unicorn category than the multiverse is.
And there's still another problem with the multiverse explanation.
The new mechanisms that have been proposed as possible ways of generating new universes themselves require fine-tuning. So in order to explain the fine-tuning, you have to posit prior universe-generating mechanisms that themselves require fine-tuning.
But how do they require fine-tuning? I hope you actually explain that one.
And so, in the end, you're left right where you started.
The many aspects of nature that have been fine-tuned for life are overwhelming.
I guess not, so just go ahead and throw that one onto the unfounded assertion pile.
All of this evidence shows you are not insignificant. You are not an accident.
Nope. Even if there was some deistic god who set the parameters of our universe to allow for the development of life, we are still insignificant when compared to the rest of the cosmos.
And you don't suck. Someone had you in mind.
Somehow the properties of the universe may have been set to allow life to develop, therefore whatever set these properties specifically had you in mind when they set them. That's quite a jump in logic there. The fine-tuning argument gets you to a deistic god at best, which means that this deity did not necessarily have you in mind when they did anything. Well, that's it for this one. Special thanks today to Tom Giggler, one of my patrons who was kind enough to purchase the microphone boom arm from my Amazon wishlist. This thing is so much better than the cheapo made-in-China one that I was using before, it is much appreciated. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Randy McDaniel, who says, "A lot of things wrong here. One, blain taint," I think he means blatant. "One is your evidence of Bible contradiction. The whole story of Judas is that he hung himself, fell on rocks, and burst open, the field of blood. Next, Luke and Matthew recorded Peter's account, who was not only an eyewitness of Jesus, but an eyewitness of his own account." That's a really weird way to phrase that, by the way, just letting you know, maybe proofread these things in the future. Ever play the telephone game? Just because the order of the people in which Peter denied Christ to is different is not a valid ground to dismiss as contradiction when clearly the entirety of the account is the same. You're very good at cherry-picking verses quickly to create deceit and inaccuracy, I'll give you that. Well, Randy, the story of Judas is more than just the fact that it says he hanged himself in one place and he fell headlong and burst open in another. It's also the fact that the version of the story in Matthew makes it quite clear that the chief priest bought the potter's field that would be called the Field of Blood, while the story in Acts makes it quite clear that Judas bought the field that would be called the Field of Blood. This is actually one of the contradictions that led C.S. Lewis to the conclusion that not every statement in the Bible must be viewed as historical truth. And as far as Peter's denial goes, first I will say that that was certainly a novel way to defend that. I've never heard the telephone game used as a defense for the Bible before. You're wrong about it, but even if you are right, this still kinda destroys biblical inerrancy. If the telephone game could have changed the order of the denials, what else did it change? And one order had to be right while the other is wrong. Therefore, that is an error in the Bible. But on to why you're wrong about it. In Matthew, he is asked by a servant girl, then another servant girl, then the bystanders. In Luke, it was a servant girl, then a man, then another man. So unless you're of the opinion that one of the servant girls is gender fluid and that one of the singular men was somehow also a plural group of bystanders, this remains a contradiction. As always, social media links and ways to support the channel are in the description. See you next time.